you can think about it in three phases of humanity. First phase, survival. Survival, subsistence farming. Think of your caveman with a spear, trying to grow a few crops and just survive till tomorrow. Then we move to the era of work, where people are working, there's a monetary system of exchange, you are creating value, and hopefully capitalism takes over and suddenly everybody's creating wealth.
This is Steve Brown, a futurist who describes these three phases of humanity. And phase three?
Phase three, you kind of transcend work because work can now be done by machines. And yeah, to your point, it frees people up to do what they want. So what is that era? It's an era of kind of service and exploration. If you're a Star Trek fan, it's Gene Roddenberry's vision for Star Trek, right? You don't see people working in Star Trek.
Now, to be clear, Steve is not saying that this future is guaranteed, but it's one possible outcome for humanity thanks to AI. Whether AI creates this kind of abundance or destroys the economy is one of the big questions on the future of AI, and that's our mission on today's episode of The People's AI, presented by the Vana Foundation. On this season finale of season 3, we'll be exploring 10 biggest questions on the future of AI. I'm your host, Jeff Wilser, a longtime journalist and the host of the AI Summit at Consensus. And I'm proud to partner with Vana to bring you this season of The People's AI. Vana is supporting the creation of a new internet, one rooted in data sovereignty and user ownership. Their mission is to create a decentralized data ecosystem where individuals, not corporations, govern their own data and share in the value it creates. Learn more at vana.org. So today we have a very special episode, if you will. We reached out to some of the smartest futurists and thinkers of AI, and we wanted to organize this around the biggest questions that will determine what the future will look like. Now, this is, of course, is not exhaustive. There are probably like 500 really big questions on the future of AI, but we had to make some tough choices, so we're rolling with these 10. And we'll kick things off with what we alluded to in the cold open. Question 1. What will be AI's impact on jobs and the economy? Or as Steve Brown, who was an executive at Google DeepMind, as well as Intel for many years, puts it, there are sort of two camps in the AI world, and this is a big debate. Which camp is right is the core question.
There's a fair debate right now, which is, there are two camps of people. There's the camp of people who say, AI is going to destroy so much in the way of jobs that we're going to have to figure out how to rewire the economy. And the argument here is capitalism is so successful, with AI, it is turning labor into capital, it is turning people into data centers and robots. And eventually you get to the point where that system collapses because consumers are also workers. If those workers aren't working anymore, they cannot consume, and the whole process falls apart. That's camp 1.
As for camp 2?
Which is, there's always more work that can be done. And if we do this right, then we're just freeing up human capital and human talent to be able to address ever bigger and broader problems. And it'll all be fine. And I don't think anybody really knows which way it is. It may be a bit of a combination of those two. I lean more to the first camp, although I'm trying to convince myself of the second camp. People will often tell you the story about, when the railways came, it created all these more jobs, right? Because you needed railway locomotive engineers, you needed someone to drive the train, you needed someone to run the buffet car, to sell sandwiches along the way, you needed someone to make up the timetables and publish them, you needed a station master, all of the jobs that were created. And, the people that lost their jobs were the people who made the buggy whips and the carts and the cart wheels. But net, it was good. But the challenge here with that story is, in this situation, we're not talking about the Cartwrights, we are the horses. And there were millions of horses and now there are not, because we don't need them to do work anymore. So I think that's the biggest debate that we should all be engaged in, because in some ways, which way is it going to go? In some ways, it's going to go the way that we decide it goes as a society. And our political structures aren't ready for this yet.
Other futurists are more bullish. Take Kevin Surace, who sees the job landscape as transforming dramatically, but ultimately sees it leading to a net positive end.
Look, this is the most exciting time, I think, in history. And I think in our lifetimes, we have seen so much happen, right? Maybe our parents saw television and their parents saw radio, but what we have seen through an information technology revolution, certainly since the 70s and the 80s, once we had computers and we had internet, and we had smartphones, this is incredible. And now we've got AI, right? And AI is accelerating the work that can be done by these machines, if you think of it that way. Now look, we've seen this story before, and I've told this story many times, which is around the late 1980s, Excel came out and we stopped doing math. And people never think about that until I say it. And they go, you're right, we kind of stopped doing math. Yeah, nobody would pay you to do math ever again because there's a machine that does math. And we gave that up. And people will say, well, I can still do some long division. Yeah, no one's going to pay you to do long. No one's going to pay you to do those macros in your head. That's dumb. Excel does that, right? And so we gave that up and we said there's a machine that does that. And now we're doing that with language and knowledge. And to some extent, we can create content. So we're in an era of, we drove the cost of doing math down to zero by the late 80s and the early 90s. Now we're driving the cost of content creation to zero across all venues, right? Across all themes, across any job description you can have. So if you're in software QA and all you did was create scripts, we're driving the cost of creating a test script to zero.
Of course, that in turn raises a ton of domino questions about what humans will do with their time if the cost of creation goes to zero. Kevin imagines that eventually we'll become sort of robot overlords.
If you are a coder and you used to take weeks to write code, we are driving the cost of generating code to zero, all right, which means no one will pay you $200,000 a year to write code. Since the generation of code, the cost of that will be close to zero. If you write blog posts, the cost of creating blog posts today is close to zero. It was $1,500 just 2 or 3 years ago, right? I can go all the way down. This is true, of course, also with music. The cost of music creation is being driven to zero. We could talk about taste and other things, right? That's a separate thing, but related. And the cost of generating a 2-hour feature film, Hollywood quality, is being driven to zero right before our eyes. And the Dore brothers have done some terrific work at shorts that are 10 to 15 to 20 minutes long right now that are absolutely Hollywood quality. And it cost them, $200 of compute time. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. So that's what's happening. The generation of all content and any kind of knowledge is driving to zero. So then you have to ask yourself, where do I fit into that?
Exactly. What will humans be doing with our time if the cost of everything is zero?
Well, first of all, we're going to generate a lot more output, right? Immense amounts of output, both good and bad, right? We're going to generate a lot of content much faster. We're going to generate knowledge much faster, with access to knowledge much faster at a much lower cost than has ever been the case. So what do? But what you do is you start to use your experience and taste. Because in the end, I can generate 50 blog posts in a day. I can generate a year's worth of blog posts in a day. But now I am going to execute my taste and my experience against those blog posts and tune some of them, push some of them just the way they are, redo some of them completely, take out some topics that I no longer like, et cetera, right? So we become kind of the robot overlords, if you will. But I want to be clear, we've seen this in finance. We've seen it in finance now for 30-something years. When everyone in finance became the robot overlord of Excel or other programs like it, and their value was not doing math under any circumstance, right? Didn't want to do that. But their value became analyzing the outcome of that math, being strategic with it. So we employ plenty of people in finance today. Everyone's got a big finance department and no one's doing math. Think about that. No one's doing math. Okay, if this was 40 years ago, everybody in the finance department did math.
A third way to think of this is maybe both Camp 1 and Camp 2 are correct, but at different times. That's more or less the take of Derek Rydell, futurist and author of A Whole New Human, 10 Ways We Must Evolve to Survive and Thrive in the AI Age. I asked Derek what he thinks of Camp 2, or the idea that AI will create this amazing world of abundance. He makes a solid point. Timing matters.
Yeah, there's a lot. That stirs up a lot of anger in me on one hand, I'll be honest. When I hear the tech bros saying that, I know they're just talking their book mostly. And if you press and scratch the surface, now it's both right and, there's a whole thing about timing is everything. You can be right, but if the timing is wrong, it's as much as being wrong, right? So is it true that eventually we'll make it through and we'll have a new way of thinking and living and working? I believe so, absolutely. Was that true for all the farmers before the last big industrial revolution? Yes. Eventually, their ancestors found new jobs. But actually, there were all farmers and then there were no farmers. And everybody had cottage industries literally in their cottages, and then it all went to the factory. And most of the benefits did not accrue to the average worker or person until it was pretty much too late. So, but did we eventually find new things to do when the loom took over what we were doing in our cottage, or when the tractor took over what we were doing in the field, or when all the lamplighters didn't need to walk down the street and light the lamps, or the knockers where they would knock on your window because we didn't have alarm clocks? Yes, all that eventually was replaced with technology that made things more efficient, more optimized, more productivity, electrification, railroads, you name it. There's a lot of upsides to all of that. So I'm not naive to that, and I'm not a Luddite. I'm not anti-tech at all. I'm just very pro-humans.
Question 2. Will AI be exponential or asymptotic? That's a fancy way of saying, essentially, how good will AI get? And the answer to that, of course, has massive complications. It's a question that Steve Brown asks in his book, The AI Ultimatum.
That's another question I pose in my book. There's a section in it called asymptote or exponential. And I did math in school, so that's why I use those terms. Asymptote is where you have a line and you approach that line but never quite reach it. That's an asymptotic curve. And so the question is, if this is human intelligence and AIs are trained on human experience and knowledge, then maybe it can only ever approach asymptotically human level and it can never break through to become a super AI. The other theory is, well, no, we're on an exponential curve and eventually we're going to get to human level and bust straight through it. And the question is, well, which is it? Is it asymptote or exponential?
Again, no one really knows which way this will shake out. In some ways, it's the gajillion-dollar question. Steve's guess?
Seems like it's looking like exponential, and here's why. The example I give in the book is Move 37. And Move 37 is famous in the Go world.
AlphaGo, right?
AlphaGo, right? Because the AI made a breakthrough move, only having played it with itself to learn the rules and experience the way humans played it. And it made a move that everybody thought was crazy at the time, and then it turned out to win the game. And that has led to humans learning from that and now playing Go better. But Go AlphaGo can now beat any Go player in the world easily. So that all leads to us probably being on exponential, but again, the jury is still out.
Question 3, how will AI impact education? Now, in my book, there are two clear opposing forces here, and it'll be interesting to see which one wins out. The force that most news stories are focused on, and one that's kind of the obvious surface level thing here, is students are using AI to cheat. Everyone knows this. Teachers know this. They're freaked out by it. Parents know this. Parents are freaked out. All fair. AI is doing all the homework. That is all true. But there's also an opposing force. AI can be used to personalize learning, to create more interactive learning, more engaging, to help students do real work and logic to actively figure things out. Socratic dialogue style, as in the literal Socrates of Plato's dialogues. Now, typical one-on-one instruction like this was reserved for the wealthy and privileged. But theoretically, AI could bring it to billions more people in the form of basically really good, personalized, smart chatbots. So which of these opposing forces will win out? How will education be impacted? I run this framework by Kevin, and his thoughts are crystal clear. I love that he takes a very clear stance.
Look, first of all technologies always have opposing forces. Cars can be used for good, and they can be used as car bombs, right? So every technology we've ever had, we can say this. Look, in AI, if I'm a professor at a university, I had better know that all of my students are going to use AI for their homework. Just going to. And so if I were a professor, I'm not, but I've certainly spoken to lots of professors and given them this advice, which is stop grading the homework. You don't care how they do the homework. You don't care what they learn from it. Not your problem. You have 4 tests a year. You grade them on the test. The tests are done in class, computer closed. That's all. No computer, no cell phone, no nothing. You find out what they know and they don't know. And if they've learned the critical thinking skills to pass the test, they win. And if they didn't, because they literally had AI do all their work, they will lose. It will show up. It's not the end of the world. And I love the professors that say, "Oh, well, I've told my students not to use AI," and I just laugh. I said, "Are you an idiot? I mean, are you really that dumb?" Students will use whatever tools they've got. More importantly, we want them to. We want them to. I want them to learn how to use them properly, how to use them to expand their thinking, to generate more content, to argue with that content, to spar with the AI. And the reason is, when you go to get a job, 2 students show up. One shows up and says, "I didn't use a lot of AI because my professors told me not to." The other one shows up and says, "Listen, I use AI for everything. In fact, I've got 5 tools you've never heard of. They're going to crank up our productivity in this department." Who gets hired? The second one.
Steve Brown agrees, and he even cites some data in the way of receipts.
I do lots of work with educators and have done for many years. And what I'm about to say, I say with love, because I have great affection for higher education. I think it is vital. I literally grew up in a university. My dad was on campus as a warden of a hall of residence. So I grew up on a campus when I was a little kid. So it is in my veins. So higher ed is very important to me. That said, it has to change. It has to change dramatically. One, curriculum is not helping set people up for success because they need to learn different skills for the workplaces of the future. And 2, pedagogy, the way people are taught, is 200 years old at best. There have been many studies done. I think there was a study done 40 years ago, Bloom's study, 2 standard deviation study. What it shows is if you have 30 people, let's say K through 12, 30 kids being tutored, there's a standard deviation curve of the kids' performance. If you move from, and that's when if you have 1 teacher, 30 people, 30 students. If you move to a mastery model where you have 1 teacher, 30 students, but in addition, the teacher spends one-on-one time with each of the students to help them, so that's called mastery learning, the curve moves over 1 standard deviation of improvement. And if you go to one-on-one tutoring, it moves over another standard deviation. This has been shown in studies time after time, first discovered by Bloom. What that says is you can get better academic results if you use mastery learning and then you're using AI as part of the teaching process. This means teachers need to get over their egos and accept that AIs can help with the process. They still play an important role, which is to coach people, help them to become good human beings, be their cheerleaders, help them through problems. But the actual learning, the person standing at the front of the class just telling you stuff and writing notes, that's old world. And we need to get beyond that. And this whole idea of ChatGPT is cheating, horse shit, I'm sorry, that's just old frame thinking. The reason that's happening is because you're trying to get students to write essays to test their knowledge. Stop doing that. Students hate writing them. You hate marking them. Why are you still doing it? It makes no sense. Yes, it's great to be able to thread together an argument and be able to express yourself. That's an important skill to learn. But is that the only way to test people? No. Use AI to do the testing. Second thing I would say on that one is you should not just be denying AI in the classroom. Some of the best teachers I know are not only encouraging AI use in the classroom, they are requiring it, because these students are going to go out into the world where AI is with them all day, every day. So teach them how to get the most out of it.
Derek Rydell does not necessarily disagree, but he does caution that AI needs to be used the right way for this to be effective. If we're lazy with AI in education or using it as a crutch, then that can lead to mental rot. And of course, we've already seen studies that, yes, when used lazily, AI can cause cognitive atrophy. That's a thing.
So there's problem with AI right now, by the way it's used by most people, or at least a lot of people, is it's used to do the work for us, right? And that was good when it was like the tractor, so I don't have to get out there and pick all day with 10 people to do what it can do. Now, it was good and it was bad. All of the automation, physical and manual work, if you look at how people have gotten sicker and fatter and less healthy, you can trace some of that back to the fact that we don't have to work our bodies as much. And so our bodies have atrophied in a lot of ways. Now, so the same thing is true with learning. When you really learn something, you don't just get the knowledge to pass the test. You don't just get the answers to write the essay with AI. That's not learning. But learning isn't just learning. It's literally building cognitive architecture. It's literally changing your nervous system. Your capacity for conceptual thinking and language literally changes the way you see the world and experience it. It's not just words and concepts. If you don't have to break your brain a little bit, which forces neurogenesis and neuroplasticity and creates new neural pathways and literally changes the architecture of your perception, the promise of AI is potential, but it's not just going to happen. We have to consciously and intentionally use it for the purpose. So you can now use AI as a way to know yourself better. You can use AI as a way to make yourself better. You don't let it write your essay. You write your first draft and you let it be a research partner and help you. And then you show it what you've written, and you don't just say, make it better. You say, give me an honest, no BS evaluation and analysis as the greatest writer in the world. What am I doing right and wrong and why? Now you're like, ooh. And now you're not just writing an essay, you're learning the craft, the structure, and the architecture of communication, which doesn't just make you a better writer, it makes you a better thinker. It makes you a better human.
Question 4, how do we keep AI safe? There are many who would argue this is the question number 1. Fair, I see the arguments. How do we make sure that AI's interests are aligning with humanity's? How do we make sure that bad people are not doing bad things with AI? How do we ensure that automated systems are doing what we intend them to do? I pose this cluster of questions to someone who's deeply involved in AI safety. Jim Bellingham, Bloomberg Distinguished Professor at Johns Hopkins and Executive Director of the Johns Hopkins Institute for Assured Autonomy.
Okay, well, we're going to be here tomorrow still talking about this. This is a big topic. So a great question. So first of all, let me put it a little bit in perspective. When engineers design systems, one of the most sophisticated part of the engineering enterprise is being able to predict when that system will fail. We think of it as guardrails, right? There's that, I always think of that Calvin and Hobbes cartoon where, Calvin's sitting in the back seat, they're driving across the bridge and it has the sign, useful load, 10,000 pounds. And Calvin asks his dad, well, how do they know it's 10,000 pounds? And Calvin's dad goes, well, they build the bridge and they drive bigger and bigger trucks on until eventually it collapses. And then they rebuild exactly that bridge. And they, and we laugh at this, right? Because of course, we have a whole discipline where we understand the material strengths. Tacoma Narrows Bridge, right? Where the winds excited the oscillations in the bridge. That was completely unexpected to the designers. But after that, that became something that every bridge designer had to worry about. So I think that, right now, AI is at the very front end of that. So we have a very poor ability to predict what the performance limits of the systems are we're producing. So in effect, what you want is an engineer to provide guardrails to say, this system will work great.
So what's the AI version of the bridge collapsing? Jim, like many AI safety experts, he and his team are not so much worried about the Terminator scenario, but something more grounded in the here and now.
Well, part of the Institute for Assured Autonomy is a information security institute, which is basically a cybersecurity group. And one of the things that's really in the process of changing quickly is the technology both of cyber attack and cyber defense, because now you can weaponize AI. And if AI is good at programming, well, whereas one of the places you can apply programming to, well, you can apply it to basically the cyber threat problem. So this is something which is evolving quite quickly, and it's something which right now probably is, well, it's hard to say, but it's probably occurring more at the level of governments. So we know that China has an enormous offensive cyber capability, which even before AI, they were using all the time, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but I periodically will get notifications. So I held clearances. And I got a notification that all of my clearances were part of something that had been compromised to the Chinese. They had managed it, So those are, I think, major concerns. And they're major concerns not only in a geopolitical defense space, although they certainly are there, but they're also major concerns in a economic competitive sense, right? If somebody can steal all of your competitive secrets, right, and then put them to work in their own environment, the foundation for your prosperity for your country, right, is under threat. Or, maybe it's not the country, maybe it's a segment or an industry, but those are legitimate concerns, and they kind of speak to perhaps a little bit of a mental change that we probably need to make, because, we have been, a lot of the government investments in cybersecurity really focus on the defense space. So it's kind of like, well, we certainly want to make sure nobody else can get into our nuclear missiles, right? But we also want to make sure our aircraft are secure, the information that we feed our military is secure. We don't want the military dropping bombs in the wrong place, on the wrong people, because, somebody got into that data stream. And so there's a whole set of things that you would worry about in the defense world. But in the economic world, I mean, just imagine what could happen if you compromised the financial system, right? You could do just extraordinary damage. So these are the types of things which, as AI allows you to amplify the skill sets of a small number of people, these are the kinds of things we probably need to be thinking about. There's things I don't even want to talk with you about on the podcast here, right? Because I work with the health safety folks. And they have a lot of concerns about
bioterror, I'm guessing, is where you're going.
Yeah.
Or where you don't want to go, rather.
You really don't want to, it's kind of weapons of mass destruction potentially become accessible to people you really don't want having access to it. So
to be clear, listeners of this podcast, please do not create any weapons of mass destruction based on this conversation. I want to get that disclaimer. I'm anti, I want to be very clear, I'm anti weapons of mass destruction here.
I'm really good. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad. I know. It's a polarizing issue. A lot of folks are.
I want to take a clear stand on this. I want to be like a brave stand against that. A lot of folks will not come down on that one. All jokes aside, there are, of course, real risks. Kevin Suris acknowledges those risks, but he again goes back to the idea that AI is just a tool. And like many tools, it can be used for good or for bad. And the way he sees it, that's kind of the way it's always been with tech.
Well, bad actors are already doing bad things with our AI models. They're generating pixel perfect websites. They are generating absolutely beautiful phishing emails, and they're winning every single time, right? They get you to give up your MFA code or your auth app code, and they turn it over, which is why I'm doing a company in the cybersecurity space to stop that using biometrics, right? Because our fingerprints can't be easily copied, and they're not stored in the network anywhere. So look, bad actors already use every tool we've got. They're using stuff in bad ways. You can already get some of these AI models that don't have guardrails to teach you how to make anthrax. So, now the truth is you could have asked Google for that and you would have found your way to do it. Now this model is more precise and you can banter with it and you can, go back and forth and get to the result, right? So all of these are not good, but they're also good. And the good it's doing for humanity is way better than the handful of bad actors that are using things in a bad way, right? So I'm not a doomer at all. I'm very positive.
Question 5. How will AI impact human relationships? Now, we touched upon this earlier in the season, exploring how AI is impacting kids and how kids are growing up. But more broadly, if we all start using AI more and more as a thought partner, maybe as a companion of sorts, even if it's not romantic, how will that impact our human connections? Will people get more isolated from other people, seemingly quasi-fulfilled by their AI buddies? Here's Steve Brown's take.
It all comes down to how we choose to use, what's the role we want AI to play in our lives. Sure, if you're an Iron Man fan, then yeah, you will want a Jarvis assistant, right, that can help you do whatever you want to do. And I think very soon that will be a robot that lives in our homes. People think of these robots coming to our houses to do cleaning and tidy up and pick up the Legos off the floor and do the washing and do the laundry, maybe cook some meals once in a while. But because these robots have an AI in them, they can also be your personal trainer and your stylist and your bartender and your babysitter if you choose to take that risk, your doctor and nurse, right? There's all of these roles that these robots will be able to play, and people are not thinking about that expanded role. But yeah, I think we're all going to have a personal assistant in our lives that helps to book our travel and advise us. And the question is how deeply do we want to invite those into our lives? And how do we make sure that those are not our primary relationships, that our primary relationships remain human? And that is a choice that we all have to make.
Question 6, another big one. How will AI impact power dynamics, including your rights and your sovereignty? Who will be the winners and losers? And there are countless sub-questions here. How will AI impact income inequality? Will big tech get bigger? Who will own AI? Will AI respect your rights as an individual, including your right to privacy and your right to your own data, which is, of course, a core theme of the People's AI podcast? Again, this one question could be a 20-hour series, but here's Steve again to help put things in perspective.
It is a very complicated puzzle, and Jeff Hinton, the godfather of AI, and Bernie Sanders, two interesting characters out together, right? They're out on the road talking about exactly this topic of how does this affect the power dynamic? And Bernie Sanders' view is, yeah, I want that Star Trek world too. We all want it. If we could all not have to work and robots and agents do the work for us, and it frees us up to be artists and poets and writers and explore and do all the things we want to do, great. But do we think that's going to really happen because of where the capital is going to get concentrated? Who is going to own this stuff? Who is going to benefit from this stuff? And again, that is a conversation we have to have as a society. And it's Bernie Sanders is involved because this is a political question. And I don't think, one, that most of our politicians are talking about this. If they are, they're afraid of it because they don't have any answers, they don't have any good answers.
Kevin Surace reminds us that the question of power dynamics has a geopolitical lens too.
Yeah, well, look, I think first of all, look at worldwide, right? So worldwide, you have the power players in AI. It's the United States, it's China, maybe that's it really for the moment. And the reason is foundational models that are top of game take probably billions of dollars, and they take real science and real math, and these things are hard. And so we've got a couple countries at play. That is left behind 300 countries, give or take, right, that aren't playing at that level. So that's one dynamic. So the power brokers of the future are clearly those both countries and companies that lead the world in AI technology, right? Both the foundational models as well as the application of those models. So we're going to see a lot of, like Apple is clearly going to be a leader. They have a platform to apply it well, which is the iPhone, et cetera, right? Everybody's going to have their play. And as some people have said, the tech leaders are are getting more power in some way. And you'll notice the tech leaders have taken over much of media. We won't go through all of, I could just go down the line, from Paramount to whatever, but all of that money is coming from tech. And you go, why is all the money coming from tech? Well, we've seen this before. The railroad barons came and owned radio. So that's another power aspect, right? Lastly, in terms of regular folk, the people with the power at your company will be the people who know AI the best. Those who don't use AI won't be at your company. Let me say that again. Those who don't use AI first, the first thing you go to, will not be at your company. I don't know if that's a week, a month, a year, or 5 years, but it's not 20 years. So, the way you survive is you want to be the robot overlord. You know everything about AI, every model. You are doing AI first on everything you do. You don't go to Word first. You don't go to Excel first. You go to AI first and say, generate a spreadsheet that does the following thing as a template. Here's the data. Put that data in. That's what you do. And boom, there's your spreadsheet.
As for Derek Rydell, he does see the current powers of big tech likely getting more powerful, but he also sees a silver lining for individuals who grab the opportunity as a way to quickly level up, to use AI to sort of claim power on their own in ways that did not exist at the same scale.
Yeah, well, this is the good news about, when I said before in previous industrial revolutions, most of the benefits and the profits did not accrue to the average worker until much, much later in terms of greater productivity just in society. So you eventually could get a car for a lot less. It wouldn't cost you $1 million, or you could get a phone for $500 instead of $5,000. Or so there's a way in which eventually productivity lowers the cost of things, unless it's a whole nother story, unless inflation eats all that up, which is also happening. So that's where we've been getting the benefits. But like wages and real economic power has increasingly not trickled down, but trickled up. And even now we see that people are on the verge, I won't name names, but some individuals are on the verge of being the first trillionaire. And there's going to be more of those. So that's the bad news. And we see what's happening in a populist moment like this. Eventually, the Gini coefficient causes people to revolt. And so I'll just say to all you elite rich people, if you want to keep your head on your shoulders, we better solve this problem, because we've seen this play out before and it's not a pretty picture. But the really good news is that it was one thing in the past when technology and innovation led to the tractor and, the motor and all these different things. You still required a lot of capital and resources to buy all that equipment and be able to build a farm or build a factory. It was still capital intensive. And so it still went to the robber barons or the elites of the time. But now with AI, with some elbow grease and a willingness to learn and grow and work hard in this, what will be a relatively short window because people are starting to catch on, any person with Wi-Fi and a dream can write a book, create a product, create an app, build the website, launch the business, build a team of agents to market and promote it, and actually go from 0 to 6 figures or 7 figures, like for real. So there's a democratization of power that is available if you are hearing this and you have access to AI, even some of the free models. You have the ability to do the work of 10 people. And if you get some help in building agents, you can do the work of 100 people. And you really have, without having a lot of CapEx, capital resources. So if you have an entrepreneurial or creative spirit and you learn these tools, you could create your own business without a college degree, without even knowing how to create business, because the AI will walk you through it step by step. So that's the good news in terms of people that have heretofore had salary caps and wages have remained flat or disenfranchisement for social, racial, or whatever reasons. They have the power now to take power economically, creatively, and start to have agency again in their life.
But ultimately, I would argue that the way AI is being trained, developed, and deployed is still very much an open question. Will we create a framework that just scrapes your data and harvests it for big tech? Or a framework and model that pays users and creators? How will that power dynamic play out? That's a question we will continue to explore on the People's AI podcast, and it's one that's very much wide open. As Steve Brown puts it,
whenever there's a new technology, you have to build a business model behind it. And we haven't figured out that business model yet.
Question 7, what happens if we reach ASI or artificial superintelligence? Of course, this is one level higher than AGI or artificial general intelligence. The idea here is AI is not just as smart as humans, it's like way smarter. Like, what will that mean for the world, for humans? Now, it probably is not something that will happen anytime soon. AI experts debate isn't even possible, isn't even on the table. But for my money, if we're talking about the big AI questions of the future, this simply has to be in the conversation. Again, Steve Brown says that the Terminator scenario is not really what keeps him up at night. That's true for many AI experts. Although, in fairness, there are plenty of AI experts who do worry about this, who do worry about the long tail risk. So I think it's not something that we should just completely ignore. But he argues even if we take Skynet off the board, there are still massive pros and cons to consider if AI becomes smarter than humans.
Yeah, I mean, one of my big worries is not Terminators, right? Coming back from the future to kill us. James Cameron makes some great movies, but we should recognize that they're movies and, we should take them into account, and they're tales of caution, but they're not what's going to happen. That said, we need to be very careful. I'm actually more worried about making that transition we talked about between today's world and the Star Trek world and the bumpiness between now and then. I'm more worried, though, about people using AI to do bad stuff. AI is fundamentally an amplifying technology. It amplifies good people doing good things and bad people doing bad things. That's my bigger worry. There are guardrails around today's AI, so you can't tell it, hey, help me build a biological weapon. And people, they have to really think about these sorts of things. But I think the thing that you're poking on is more, we are seeing coercive behaviors, lying, misrepresentation by AIs, and a survival instinct. And, doing things, literally blackmailing people to try and not be turned off. And that is very worrying. But on the other side, we're already seeing that today's AIs are smart enough and smarter enough than us in certain areas. It's kind of bumpy that they are coming up with mathematical breakthroughs that have stumped human mathematicians for generations. And so once you see math fall, and you're going to see a lot of this in the next 12 months, that's math as the foundation of physics. Then physics starts to fall. You get some physics breakthroughs. That leads to material science breakthroughs, chemistry breakthroughs, biological breakthroughs. We've seen some of those with AlphaFold already, and that gives you medical breakthroughs. So AI is going to lead to some significant, I call it the fast forward button for scientific discovery. I think we'll see more scientific advancement in the next 5 years than the last 55 years.
Question 8, fake news. How will we as humans navigate a world of misinformation? AI slop is only getting easier to create. And actually, personal little riff here and rants, I argue AI slop, that term, is actually a little damaging and inaccurate. The problem is not that it's slop. The problem is it's actually getting less sloppy, right? AI slop is actually getting to be like good content. What happens when the slop becomes solid? Deepfake videos are a dime a dozen. In the future, how will we know what's true? If videos are no longer an oracle of truth, what do we do? Now, Kevin Suris sees this problem as something we've dealt with for decades, so he characteristically is more bullish.
So a photo has not been an oracle of truth since Photoshop. Now, what are we doing? We're democratizing Photoshop so that more people can make fake stuff. But anyone, including countries, or including me, because I've used Photoshop since Photoshop 1.0, anyone who knew how to use Photoshop could doctor a photo in a way and put, Trump in a forest he's never been in. Easy to do for the last 30 years, right? This is not new. This is old tech. More people can do it, so there's more of it. As you said, don't use AI slop, but nevertheless, there's more of it. But already, if anyone absolutely 100% trusted a photo, I don't know, they've been living under a rock. Okay, then it comes to videos. Well, we've been making very fake videos with CGI for 30 years. Now, what we're doing with AI is democratizing access to that. So once you democratize it, now the bad actors go, oh, I can do this for pennies on the dollar, right? This is super easy. So like anything, all technology, we already talked about this, can be used for good or bad. So look, keep your eyes and ears open, and don't lose your critical thinking. And when you see something that says ivermectin cures cancer, go look for that peer-reviewed research, right? From a real research publication, right? It probably doesn't cure cancer. It's probably BS, but go do the research yourself. And if you can't, I don't know what you're going to do in this world, right? Because you need your critical thinking skills more than ever.
Question 9, home stretch. How will AI change what it means to be human? Or put differently, what do we need to do to preserve our humanity? This is something that Derek Riddall thinks a lot about and is the core question of his book, A Whole New Human.
I'm not a Luddite. I love technology. I just know that if we don't remember we're the greatest technology, our consciousness, our mind, our capacity, so that we're using the tools rather than being used by them, we stay consumers and hopefully creators, not just become those that are consumed. And if you even look at the hyperscalers, like their stated mission is replace all human labor. Now, what does that really mean? It means replace everything that a human can do that has brought value, market value. So, and then you might say, well, what's left? Well, we'll be able to take care of the elderly and the orphans. And yes, some of that's true, and that will be beautiful. But even in Japan now, they're creating elder care bots. So we have, embodied humanoids. We'll be able to do so much stuff for nature and so much stuff for the animals. And all of that can be also automated and have embodied robots. So the thing is yes, there's always been new work for humans, but the difference with AI is AI isn't just an extension like the tractor was of our body, or an extension, a small extension like the calculator was of our mind, even though you can study the calculator and the unfoldment of that and see the loss of certain memory capacities and other kinds of cognitive abilities. GPS was an extension. We can get places easier, but you can see the ability to map, spatial mapping, cognitive mapping, falling off a cliff because of that technology. MIT has a study now, students using AI, their cognitive abilities are falling off a cliff. So every technology gives us a benefit, but has a cost. And the question is the cost more than we can afford? And if we are outsourcing our abilities, and a lot of people are, just to make you more productive, efficient. Remember how the smartphone was supposed to make you smarter and more productive? And now we actually know a smartphone next to you, even turned off, lowers your cognition. And so we have to just be aware, because at some point we'll cross a Rubicon where we have outsourced so much of our creative ability, communicative ability, innovative ability, cognitive ability, and then we'll find ourselves in a position where we can't live without the AI, and then we'll find ourselves in a position where we must serve the AI.
So that brings us to a subset of his question. What happens to creativity, to creatives, to the creative class, the creative economy when, as Kevin put it earlier, the cost of creation goes to nearly zero? Now, Derek thinks that it eventually boils down to what makes us uniquely human.
I mean, I've coached hundreds of thousands of artists, creators, entrepreneurs, healers, you name it, Oscar winners, Emmy winners. And that's been my whole life, is to help people discover what are they really made of and made for? What is unique about them that is irreplaceable? When the Oracle of Delphi, a woman, by the way, warned us, you better know yourself. Because if you don't know you, somebody knows you better, and guess who's using who? And all of that. When Proverbs says, where there's no vision, the people perish, these are now not just religious or ancient. This needs to be the new curriculum in education. We need to know, what is it about us that is singular, that is one of one. And there is something about us. There is a unique embodied life, wisdom, taste, perspective. And that's what's going to make you stand out and be a signal in the noise. Because AI will do, is already almost doing, and it's going to get better. This is the worst it's going to be. It's going to do everything a human can do better, faster, cheaper. But it will never be able to do you uniquely. And in that future, being truly human, authentic, originally who you are, that's going to be the Gucci and the Prada and the highest value. In fact, real authentic humans that know who they are, know what they stand for, know where they've come from, and have embodied that wisdom and that taste and that point of view into their words, their work, their workshops, their world, their business. Those people are going to become the new moat. It's going to be the new moat for you, for the business. The businesses are all going to get creatively destroyed. We see that with the software right now. They're all going to get creatively destroyed like they did inside this phone. And pretty soon, there will be nothing differentiating except for a lot of money, because AI doesn't have a point of view, but you do. You can tell I'm passionate about this, right?
Question 10. Now, this is something of a cheat, I'll admit it, but I think it's important to have some humility here. And to quote Donald Rumsfeld, of all people, to ask, what are the unknown unknowns? So far, we've explored all of the ways we think AI will impact the world. Those are, if you will, the known unknowns, questions we know to ask. And of course, there are 50 other questions we could have covered. But this tech is so transformative, I think it's likely that decades from now, we'll look back and see the biggest impact of AI is something we were not even talking about in 2026. What will that be? We'll leave the final word to Steve Brown, who I think gives some excellent advice for all of us. Even if we don't know the answers, it can be useful to think like a futurist and ask the right questions, or even some of the right questions, and to engage in the conversation.
And as a society, I call myself a futurist. I'm an AI futurist. I deputize everybody listening to this podcast to be a futurist. And all that means is driving conversations about the future that we want to build and the future that we want to avoid. That's all a futurist does. That's the two central questions that we try and help people ask and answer. And when it comes to society and the collision of AI with human society and human culture, we all need to participate in that conversation.
Well, there you have it. Thank you again to our guests, our panel of distinguished futurists, Steve Brown, Kevin Surace, Jim Bellingham, Derek Radal, and thank you again to my partner, the Vana Foundation. Vana is supporting the creation of a new internet, one rooted in data sovereignty, user ownership, and data portability. Their mission is to create a decentralized data ecosystem where individuals, not corporations, govern their own data and share in the value it creates, basically helping to answer the question of how power dynamics change. We discussed earlier, the idea is to help give power to individuals. Learn more at vana.org. Thank you to Bradford Craig for our sound design and music. Thank you to Kate Morgan for research and producing. Thank you to Jasper Chua for creating our videos on YouTube. If this is your first time on People's AI, please subscribe, share it on social, send to a friend. Thanks again, and see you soon on season 4. That will be launching soon. Thanks again. See you next time.